Today we get to begin that switch from drawing material to paint, so it has a very different feel. This is the material you'll be receiving today. It should be already in your box. You have a palette knife. There should be a cup of water at your table. You're sharing it with your neighbor, so your elbow partner. And there also should be a solo cup with black and also an additional one with white in it. We'll be mostly using black and white today, maybe an additional color if we have time. To begin with, we want to put black on the palette, so your palette is actually your table surface. You want to put the black opposite to the white, so they don't go side by side. They're on polar opposite ends, so like one's near your right hand, the other is near your left hand. And that's so that we don't unintentionally start to mix the two together. Okay, so now I'm going to start to separate out the piles. I'm going to start with the white first. And to do this, I use a palette knife. Now, you'll be getting a plastic one of these. It looks similar to a butter knife, like a plastic one. And you're going to be wiping your palette knife onto a paper towel once you contaminate it. So for now, I'm just using white. So I'm just taking pools of white. And the goal here is that we're going to be mixing 10 different shades of gray, 1 being white, 10 being black. This should sound very familiar because we've done it with pretty much every medium that we've explored. And value scales are key. They're something that I have to remind myself of when I'm painting, that you have to be able to get a range of values and not just a few, but a whole bunch of them. Beginning to mix the charcoal gray. So that is like almost black, but with a little bit of white. Here's what I have to do with my palette knife every time I want to put a little bit of black into a white pile. I have to wipe it off with a paper towel, and that's to clean off that knife blade. So I'm doing that off camera. So every time I pause for a minute, I'm wiping my knife off camera so I don't contaminate all the colors. This becomes even more important as we move into color mixing with real colors. Black and white technically aren't colors. They're a shade, which is black, and a tint, which is white. So technically, we're not considering those colors. But we are making a whole bunch of different values with the gray. And you want it to be a progression. So you can see I'm mixing. When you use that palette knife, you kind of swirl it around. I treat it like kind of like a silicone spatula. So I flip it like I'm flipping a pancake. And you want to stir until it mixes. What you don't want is any weird marbleizing effect. So it should range from very pale gray all the way to dark gray. We are going to use pure white. We are going to use pure black as well. Off camera, I spent a couple minutes adjusting these because I need them to look correct on my palette before I actually start to paint. And the deal is this paint does dry quickly, especially if the heater's on. So you have to mix big enough piles of paint, but not wasting the paint. So you have to find a perfect balance there. Once you're satisfied with the range of grays, then you can begin to paint. Here's also how you can clean your palette knife off. You can just swirl it around in the water and then paper towel it dry if you have like crusty stuff on that knife. Here's what I'm doing to mix, just so you can see kind of up close what's happening. So you take your knife blade, and there should be some flexibility to the knife blade. Even if it's a plastic one, you should be able to flex it and kind of flip and kind of swirl the paint together until there's no weird like stripes or weird marbleization happening. All right, so when you are ready to paint, you need to pick out 2 brushes. The bigger, the better for this. You want to dedicate 1 brush to the whites and 1 brush to the blacks. So you can view it as lights and darks. That might be a better way of thinking of it. But make sure you set those 2 brushes aside and each one has a specific role. And when you go to dip your brush into the paint, this is about all you need on your brush hair. So you don't want to go dipping it in past that metal part, which is called the ferrule. Here's how you hold that brush. You want to hold it far back and kind of hold it like a wand. Some brushes have long handles. That's so you can get farther back. Artists love the long handles, so you're not like crouching right in front of your artwork an inch away from your eyeball. Just a quick note about how to paint and lay down paint. You want to do short strokes, and you either want to pull up or pull down. Sometimes you go at a diagonal, sometimes a horizontal stroke, but you always limit it to 1 inch or less. The only exception to that is if you're painting huge, and we're not going to be painting huge in this class. If you drag the brush sideways, you can get a skinny mark. If you curve your brush or twist it, you can get like a comma or apostrophe like you see up here. So how you hold the brush and twist it in your fingertips will create different marks. That's going to be important, having a variety of marks. For this, not so much, because we're just doing a basic value scale. So you should have already done your outlining of the value scale, and we're going to start with the number 1 square, which is white. So it's pure white, and yes, you do have to fill in the white with white paint. I'm just going to pick one way with my stroke, and I want it to be flat and even, so not a thick buildup in any one area, and try and make it fit within that rectangle. You can drag the brush a couple different directions. So remember, this is the light brush. Next, I'll be switching brushes off camera, so I'm going to go with my dark brush because I'm going to go all the way to box 10. That's the one to the far right, and I'm going to be filling that in with pure black. And again, same thing where you're trying to fill it in somewhat smoothly. Don't apply the paint too thick. Don't dip your brush too much into the paint. You can always go back and rehydrate, dip your brush in the paint if it's not rolling on. I'm doing this without using any water, but you could use a tiny bit of water on it if you feel like the paint's drying out fast. If you put too much water in, it'll be transparent. Alright, so I'm going to speed this up. I'm painting on square 2 there. I'll just say that you want to keep that light brush, use that for square 1 through square 5, and then switch to your dark brush for square 10 through 6. And I like to work backwards, which is why I said it in that order. You may need to adjust. So sometimes you lay something down onto the paper and it dries differently than it looks like when it's wet. So just evaluate how your value scale is looking. There needs to be an obvious shift, and it should be kind of incremental, so it needs to be in the right ratio. It can't just jump from a light shade to a really dark value. So make sure that there's kind of a rhythm to your value scale. So the one that I created up here, it's probably going to show up a little bit too dark on the screen, but there really is a shift in between each one of those. And that's when you call it done and you can move on to the harder stuff. Okay, so we're going to be doing a couple of gradients just using black and white. It would be harder if I asked you to use color. So for the gradients, you choose a direction. This should sound very familiar too. I'm going from left to right horizontally. You still have to go with a 1-inch stroke or less. When I'm transitioning from one value to another, I do even shorter strokes. One of the keys to doing a gradient is to overlap with the previous strokes so that you can get it to kind of mix together. I use a specific stroke. It's called feathering. So I'm feathering one body of paint into another. But if it dries really fast, it can be a little bit frustrating. There's a couple of ways to get something to blend when we're talking about paint. One of them is getting a similar value, so making sure that you match the value. Like right there, there's a jump in value, so I either have to mix another in-between value or I kind of feather on top to get it to kind of fade in, which is called scumbling. So I'm kind of doing a dry brush on top of that area until it kind of blurs out. The other method is to work wet into wet, which means both bodies of paint are wet at the same time, and you mix one value into the other while they're not yet dried. But that's a little bit trickier if the heat is on and the room is helping to dry out the paint quickly. Maybe a little bit of water could be useful, but you want it to be this smooth shift from one value to another. And lastly, you end up with white. Here's another type of gradient, and I probably should have had you do this in a square because it's supposed to be somewhat of a radial gradient. That means kind of round-ish, but it ended up looking kind of funky. You can still do it. It's not a bad practice. It's about kind of curving and your stroke and spiraling into a lighter point. It's a skill that you'll need if you're going to do a round object, and I'm going to have you practice some round objects anyway, so it's a good skill to have. So you're starting off dark and then curving your stroke with a lighter value. I kind of did a border around this rectangle and then started to fade as I went in. So as I keep going in, it's like a jawbreaker. It gets lighter and lighter as it goes towards the center there. And then you try and smooth out your values so it's not so rough.